The first warning came from a man nobody believed. A weathered old rancher named Aaron Pike who had spent nearly 60 years living in the vast desert wilderness surrounding the isolated town of Red Mesa. Aaron was the kind of man who knew every inch of the land. He could identify an animal from a single track in the dust, predict a storm days before it arrived, and navigate the endless maze of canyons without a map. For decades people respected his judgment. But everything changed when he began talking about the thing he claimed was stalking the desert after dark. It started in the summer of 1987 when livestock began disappearing across the region. Ranchers blamed mountain lions, rustlers, and coyotes, but Aaron insisted something else was responsible. During a town meeting, he stood before his neighbors and described an encounter that left the room frozen in silence. He explained that while tracking missing cattle into Black Ridge Canyon, he spotted what appeared to be a young ranch hand standing on a ridge overlooking the canyon floor. At first nothing seemed unusual. The figure looked completely human, dressed in ordinary clothing and standing perfectly still beneath the setting sun. Then it smiled. Aaron claimed the smile stretched far wider than any human mouth could possibly stretch. The skin around its face twisted and pulled unnaturally, as though it were a mask being worn by something underneath. He watched in horror as the figure tilted its head at an impossible angle before suddenly sprinting across the ridge. The movement was wrong. One moment it ran upright like a man, the next it dropped onto all fours like a wolf, then rose onto two legs again without losing speed. Aaron estimated it crossed nearly half a mile in less than 10 seconds. Most terrifying of all, he said it never once looked away from him. Every step it took, every impossible movement, happened while its eyes remained fixed directly on his face. Nobody knew what to say after hearing the story. Some thought age had finally caught up with him. Others believed the desert heat had affected his mind. A few older residents exchanged nervous glances, but refused to comment. 3 weeks later, Aaron disappeared without a trace. His horse wandered back into town covered in sweat, its saddle stained with blood. Search parties combed the canyons for days, but found no sign of the rancher. No body. No tracks. No evidence. It was as if he had simply been erased from existence. Over the years, his disappearance became another unsolved mystery buried beneath local folklore. And eventually people stopped talking about it altogether. More than 3 decades later, in October 2019, a journalist named Michael Carter arrived in Red Mesa while researching forgotten settlements of the American Southwest. Michael had spent years documenting abandoned mining towns, lost communities, and unusual regional histories. The last thing he expected was to become involved in a supernatural investigation. Red Mesa appeared almost untouched by time. Dusty roads stretched between weathered buildings, old pickup trucks sat parked outside homes, and conversations still happened on front porches rather than online. While interviewing residents, Michael met Sarah Pike, Aaron's granddaughter, who was cleaning out an old storage shed behind her ranch. Inside were dozens of boxes filled with family belongings untouched since Aaron's disappearance. While helping organize the items, Michael noticed a locked wooden chest hidden beneath old blankets and ranch equipment. Sarah explained that it had belonged to her grandfather, and that nobody had opened it in over 30 years. Curiosity got the better of them. After forcing the rusted lock open, they discovered a collection of journals, photographs, maps, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes. At first the contents seemed ordinary. There were records of cattle movements, weather observations, and personal reminders. But as Michael examined the journals more closely, the tone changed dramatically. Aaron's writing became increasingly frantic. Entries described hearing voices outside his home late at night. Not random voices, but familiar ones. Friends, neighbors, family members. Sometimes the voices belonged to people who were miles away. Other times they belonged to people who had already died. One entry described hearing his deceased brother call his name from the darkness outside the barn. Another claimed a woman who had been buried nearly 10 years earlier appeared outside his window asking for help. Aaron repeatedly emphasized the same warning. Never answer a voice calling from the darkness after sunset. According to his notes, that was exactly what the creature wanted. As Michael continued reading, he encountered repeated references to an ancient legend whispered among local tribes for generations. The legend spoke of a practitioner of forbidden magic who abandoned humanity in exchange for supernatural abilities. Through rituals considered so evil that even discussing them was forbidden, the individual transformed into something monstrous. The being gained the ability to imitate animals, mimic human voices, alter its appearance, and wear the skin of victims to disguise itself among the living. Aaron referred to the creature by a name that appeared dozens of times throughout the journal, Skinwalker. Unlike the simplified versions of the story that often appeared online, Aaron's notes described something far more terrifying. According to accounts he collected from elders and ranchers, a skinwalker was not merely a shapeshifter. It was a predator that studied its victims. It watched them from a distance for days or weeks, learning their habits, voices, and routines. It could perfectly imitate the sound of a loved one calling for help. It could appear as a familiar face standing in the distance. Some stories claimed it could even enter homes if invited unknowingly, by someone fooled into believing it was human. Michael remained skeptical until he reached an entry dated only 3 days before Aaron vanished. The handwriting shook violently across the page. It stood outside my barn tonight wearing Daniel's face. Daniel died 6 years ago. The eyes were wrong. The smile was wrong. But the voice was perfect. Michael stared at the sentence repeatedly. The next pages became increasingly disturbing. Aaron wrote about seeing figures standing on ridges at sunset. He described hearing footsteps circling his house every night between midnight and 3 in the morning. Several entries mentioned finding strange footprints that began as wolf tracks before transforming into human footprints midway through the trail. One sketch showed a tall figure standing beneath a full moon wearing what appeared to be a human face stretched tightly over an elongated skull. Another page contained only a warning written over and over again across every inch of paper. If you hear your name outside after dark, do not answer. If you see someone where they should not be, do not approach. If it knows your name, leave immediately. The final pages were stained and partially torn. One contained a rough map of Black Ridge Canyon with a red circle marking a remote location deep within the cliffs. The last complete entry simply read, "I found where the ritual happened. The stories are true. It knows I found it. Every night it comes closer." Beneath the sentence was a smear that looked disturbingly similar to dried blood. Michael tried to dismiss the journal as the product of fear and isolation, but the consistency of the details troubled him. Determined to understand what Aaron had experienced, he began interviewing older residents. Most refused to discuss the subject. Some ended conversations the moment he mentioned Black Ridge Canyon. Others reluctantly shared stories that matched Aaron's notes almost perfectly. One elderly woman described hearing her dead husband call her name from outside her bedroom window years after his funeral. A retired rancher claimed he encountered a wolf standing upright beside a fence during a thunderstorm. Another resident remembered seeing a figure wearing a familiar face watching him from a distant hill, only to discover the person he thought he saw was hundreds of miles away at the time. Every story contained the same elements: mimicry, impossible movements, familiar voices, and overwhelming feelings of being watched. As October drew to a close, Michael found himself becoming obsessed. The more he learned, the more convinced he became that Aaron genuinely believed he had uncovered something hidden within Black Ridge Canyon. Eventually, curiosity overcame caution. Carrying cameras, flashlights, recording equipment, and Aaron's journal, Michael drove toward the canyon shortly before sunset. The desert grew unnaturally quiet as he approached. Birds vanished. Insects stopped making noise. Even the wind seemed to fade. Massive cliffs rose around him like ancient walls, casting long shadows across the rocky landscape. Standing at the entrance of the canyon, Michael experienced a feeling he would later struggle to describe. It was not fear exactly. It was the certainty that something had already noticed him. As darkness slowly spread across the desert and the first stars appeared overhead, he stepped deeper into Black Ridge Canyon, unaware that he was following the same path Aaron Pike had taken 32 years earlier, and moving closer to a secret connected to an ancient Skinwalker ritual so horrifying that generations had tried to bury it forever. While somewhere beyond the shadows, hidden among the rocks and watching with patient eyes, something was already waiting for him to arrive. Michael stood alone at the entrance of Black Ridge Canyon, as the last light of the sun disappeared behind the mesas. The journal felt heavier in his backpack than it should have, as if the pages inside carried more than ink and paper. He switched on his camera, checked the batteries one final time, and began walking deeper into the canyon. The silence immediately felt wrong. In most wilderness areas there was always some kind of sound, wind moving through brush, insects hidden among rocks, distant calls of birds. But inside Black Ridge Canyon there was almost nothing. Every footstep echoed against the stone walls before vanishing into the darkness ahead. Michael followed the route marked in Aaron Pike's map, moving between towering cliffs that seemed to grow taller with every mile. As night settled completely over the desert, the temperature dropped rapidly. Cold air flowed through the canyon like water. Around 9 p.m., he reached a narrow section where the walls squeezed together so tightly that only a thin strip of stars remained visible overhead. That was when he heard it. A voice. Faint at first. Barely more than a whisper carried by the wind. He stopped walking and listened carefully. The voice came again. Michael. His entire body stiffened. It sounded exactly like his mother. The same tone. The same accent. The same gentle way she pronounced his name. For a moment his mind struggled to process what he was hearing. His mother lived nearly 2,000 miles away. There was no possible way she could be there. Yet the voice sounded perfect. Michael over here. The words echoed from somewhere deeper within the canyon. Suddenly Aaron's warning flashed through his mind. If you hear your name outside after dark, do not answer. Michael forced himself to remain silent. The voice called again. Then again. Each time sounding slightly closer. He gripped his flashlight tighter and continued forward without responding. After several minutes the voice stopped completely. The silence that followed felt even worse. An hour later he reached the location marked by Aaron's final map. Hidden between massive boulders was a small clearing unlike anything else in the canyon. Strange symbols had been carved into the stone walls. Some appeared ancient while others looked surprisingly recent. In the center stood a circle of blackened rocks surrounding the remains of what had once been a fire pit. Michael knelt beside it and noticed fragments of bone mixed with ashes. He photographed everything. Nearby he discovered several animal skulls arranged in a pattern around the clearing. Most appeared to belong to coyotes and deer, but one skull looked disturbingly human. As he examined it, a sudden feeling of dread washed over him. Something was watching. He stood and slowly turned his flashlight toward the surrounding cliffs. Nothing. Only darkness. Yet the sensation remained. Stronger now. Almost overwhelming. Then movement flashed across the edge of his vision. A shadow darted behind a rock formation nearly 100 yards away. Michael swung the flashlight toward it but saw nothing. His heart pounded. He told himself it was probably an animal. A coyote. A deer. Anything but what he was thinking. He continued documenting the site for another 20 minutes before deciding to leave. As he packed his equipment, he noticed fresh footprints in the dirt. Human footprints. The problem was that they hadn't been there earlier. He knew because he had photographed the ground when he arrived. The tracks appeared suddenly as if someone had walked into the clearing while he was distracted. The footprints led toward the darkness beyond the rocks. Michael followed them cautiously. After about 50 yards they changed. Human footprints became animal tracks. Large canine tracks. Another 20 yards later they changed again. Human. Then animal. Then human. The pattern continued until the trail disappeared entirely on solid stone. Michael stared at the ground in disbelief. Every story he had collected. Every warning. Every journal entry. The evidence was sitting directly in front of him. That was when he heard footsteps behind him. Slow. Deliberate. Crunch. 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 He spun around. Nobody was there. The sound stopped instantly. For several seconds nothing moved. Then a figure stepped from behind a distant rock. Michael's blood ran cold. It looked like Aaron Pike. Not a younger version from old photographs. The elderly Aaron Pike from the final years before his disappearance. Same face. Same beard. Zamahat. Impossible. Aaron had vanished over 30 years earlier. The figure stood motionless beneath the moonlight. Then it smiled. The smile stretched wider and wider until the skin around its cheeks began to tear. Michael felt pure terror explode through his body. The face shifted. twisted, changed. One moment it looked like Aaron. The next it resembled someone else entirely. Then another face. Then another. Like a collection of stolen identities struggling beneath a single layer of skin. Michael backed away. The thing took a step forward. Its movements looked wrong. Almost mechanical. Like it was imitating how humans walked without fully understanding the process. Suddenly it dropped onto all fours. Bones cracked loudly. Arms elongated. The spine bent unnaturally. Within seconds the figure transformed into a massive wolf-like shape. Then it charged. Michael turned and ran. The creature moved with impossible speed. He could hear claws striking stone behind him. Every few seconds the sound changed. Claws became footsteps. Footsteps became claws again. The thing was shifting forms while chasing him. Michael sprinted through the canyon, barely avoiding rocks and ledges hidden in the darkness. The distance between them continued shrinking. Then another voice called from ahead. Michael. This time it was Sarah Pike. Michael, help me. The voice sounded terrified. It came from somewhere directly in front of him. For a split second he nearly changed direction. Then he remembered Sarah was back in town. The realization saved his life. He ignored the voice and kept running. Moments later a dark shape exploded from behind a boulder, exactly where the voice had originated. The creature had anticipated his response. It knew how humans thought. It knew how to manipulate them. Michael finally reached his truck shortly before midnight. He jumped inside, locked the doors and started the engine. As the headlights illuminated the canyon entrance, he saw the creature standing among the rocks. It appeared human once again. This time wearing the face of a young woman he had never seen before. The smile remained impossibly wide. The eyes reflected the headlights like those of a predator. Michael accelerated and sped away. He didn't stop driving until the lights of Red Mesa appeared on the horizon. Back in his motel room he reviewed the camera footage hoping to prove exhaustion had affected his judgment. Instead the recordings made everything worse. Several photographs showed a tall figure standing in the background watching him from impossible distances. One image captured a face partially hidden behind a rock. Another revealed a pair of reflective eyes visible hundreds of feet away. Most disturbing was a short video recorded near the ritual site. For less than 2 seconds, a distorted human-shaped figure appeared directly behind Michael before vanishing from the next frame. He barely slept that night. At dawn he began searching through historical records connected to Black Ridge Canyon. What he discovered changed the entire investigation. Hidden within archived newspapers and tribal accounts was repeated mention of a man named Nathan Crow. In the late 1800s, Crow had been accused of practicing forbidden rituals deep within the desert. Several disappearances were linked to him. Witnesses claimed livestock vanished around his property. Travelers reported hearing strange voices calling from the hills. Eventually Crow disappeared after being confronted by members of a local tribal community. Official records stated he died. Unofficial accounts told a different story. According to the oldest legends, Crow completed a ritual that transformed him into something no longer human. The ritual required acts so horrific that many versions of the story refused to describe them. What mattered was the result. Crow gained the ability to change form, mimic voices, and wear the appearance of others. The legends claimed he could steal identities from his victims and continue using them long after their deaths. Michael compared these accounts with Aaron's journal. The similarities were undeniable. Names changed. Details varied. But the core story remained identical. Something ancient was connected to Black Ridge Canyon. Something that had survived for more than a century. As he continued researching, another pattern emerged. Every few decades a cluster of disappearances occurred around the canyon. Then the activity stopped. Years later it returned again. The most recent cycle appeared to be happening now. Several missing persons cases from neighboring counties remained unsolved. Hikers vanished. Hunters disappeared. Travelers abandoned vehicles along isolated roads. Authorities treated each case separately, but viewed together they formed a disturbing pattern centered around Black Ridge Canyon. Michael realized he was no longer investigating a legend. He was investigating an active predator.